The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor with a soft ding that seemed to echo through my chest. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as I stepped onto the polished marble floor of Morrison Industries' executive level. The hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one side showing the sprawling city below, and mahogany-paneled walls lined with portraits of former CEOs on the other. Every single portrait showed the same thing. Older. White men in expensive suits, their eyes following me as I walked past. My father's portrait hung at the end of the hall, installed just 6 months ago after his sudden heart attack. David Morrison, Jr., beloved CEO, visionary leader, family man. Gone at 52, leaving behind a company worth $2 billion, and a son nobody thought was ready to fill his shoes. I paused in front of his picture, adjusting the strap of my laptop bag. Dad was wearing his favorite navy suit in the portrait, the one he'd worn to every major board meeting. His smile was confident, assured. The smile of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "You ready for this, Dad?" I whispered to the portrait. The silence felt like an answer. I walked toward Conference Room A, the executive boardroom where my fate would be decided today. Through the frosted glass doors, I could see silhouettes moving around the massive oval table. 7 figures in dark suits, the senior executives who'd been running their departments since before I was born, men who'd built their careers on the assumption that gray hair meant wisdom, that decades of experience trumped fresh ideas, that a young face meant incompetence. Today they were about to learn otherwise. I checked my watch. 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes. Early, exactly as my father had taught me. Early shows respect, Alex. On time shows you're cutting it close. Late shows you don't care. I could hear voices through the thick doors now, fragments of conversation that made my stomach clench. Board's making a mistake. 28 years old, for Christ's sake. Daddy's money won't save him when the numbers come in. I took a deep breath, balancing my coffee cup and laptop in one hand, and pushed open the mahogany doors. The scent hit me immediately. Expensive cologne layered over leather chairs and the faint smell of fresh paper. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Intimidating, powerful, designed to make people feel small. The oval table could seat 20, but today only 7 executives occupied chairs around its polished surface. They were deep in conversation, their voices carrying that particular authority that comes from decades in corner offices. "Hey, the meeting's not for assistants," came a voice from my left without its owner even looking up from his phone. It was Robert Chen, Senior Vice President of Operations, 54 years old, Harvard MBA, 23 years with the company. His voice carried that dismissive tone I'd heard too many times, the sound of someone who'd decided I wasn't worth his attention before I'd even spoken. I kept walking, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The other executives glanced up, briefly, taking in my jeans, sweater, and sneakers with barely concealed disdain. I dressed deliberately casual this morning, knowing it would throw them off balance. Let them underestimate me. "The real presentation will be in 20 minutes, Chen added, still not looking at me. "You can wait outside." I chose a seat halfway down the table, directly across from Marcus Thompson, head of sales. Thompson was the kind of man who still believed business was done on golf courses and in private clubs. His department had lost us 2 major clients in the past quarter alone, but he'd somehow convinced himself it was due to market conditions rather than his outdated approach. The coffee was still hot, steam rising from the cup as I set it down next to my laptop. The sound of ceramic meeting wood seemed unnaturally loud in the room. "We don't need a CEO who looks like a student," came a whisper from down the table, loud enough for me to hear, quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. That was James Patterson, Director of Human Resources, 58 years old, and the man responsible for hiring practices that had kept our company stuck in 1995. His department had a diversity rate that would make a 1950s country club look progressive. The murmurs continued around the table. I caught fragments while opening my laptop. 28 years old. And he never worked anywhere else. Daddy's money. Won't last 6 months. Boards lost their minds. Each comment felt like a small knife, but I'd been preparing for this moment since the day my father died. I'd spent 6 months learning every detail of every department, memorizing financial reports, understanding exactly where each of these men had failed the company. Today wasn't about proving I belonged here. It was about proving they didn't. Richard Harrison, Chief Financial Officer, was typing aggressively on his phone, probably texting his wife about the kid who thought he could run a Fortune 500 company. Harrison had been my father's right-hand man for 15 years, but his loyalty had died with Dad. Now he saw me as an obstacle to his own ambitions. "Did someone call building security?" asked Stephen Richards, head of marketing, not bothering to lower his voice. I thought this floor was restricted access. A few chuckles rippled around the table. These men had worked together for decades. They had their rhythms, their inside jokes, their shared understanding that they were the real power in this company. To them, I was an intruder in their sanctuary. I opened my laptop and began reviewing my presentation one final time. The quarterly projections stared back at me from the screen. Brutal numbers that told a story of systematic failure across every department. 3 consecutive quarters of decline. Revenue down 18%. Customer satisfaction at an all-time low. Stock price dropping faster than a stone. The worst part wasn't the numbers themselves. It was the fact that these 7 men had convinced themselves the problems were temporary. Market fluctuations, economic uncertainty, bad luck. Anything except the truth. That their leadership had become obsolete. Michael Foster, Director of Technology, was the youngest of the group at 45, but he might as well have been 70. His department still used software systems from the early 2000s because he believed, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Never mind that our competitors were running circles around us with AI-powered analytics and cloud-based solutions. Seriously, though, Foster said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Who let the intern into the executive boardroom? More laughter. I could feel my face heating up, but I kept my expression neutral. These men thought humor would diminish me, make me feel unwelcome, convince me to leave. They'd underestimated how much their dismissal motivated me. The door opened again, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Chairman Edward Morrison walked in. 72 years old, silver-haired, sharp as a surgical blade, and the most respected man in the industry. He'd been my father's mentor, the one who'd guided Morrison Industries from a small manufacturing company to a global powerhouse. Morrison's presence changed everything. The executives straightened in their chairs, suddenly professional. Phones disappeared. Side conversations stopped. Even their posture shifted from casual dismissal to respectful attention. But Morrison's eyes swept the room and landed directly on me. Without hesitation, without acknowledging any of the 7 executives who'd been running his company for years, he walked straight to where I sat. The room held its breath. "Ready to begin, sir?" Morrison asked, extending his hand to me with the respect reserved for equals. The silence that followed was deafening. 7 heads turned toward me in unison, confusion flickering across their faces like a wave. The executive who'd called me an assistant, Chen, went visibly pale. Richards, who joked about building security, suddenly found his phone fascinating. Patterson's whispered comment about students hung in the air like smoke. I stood up, shaking Morrison's hand firmly. His grip was strong, confident, and his eyes held a spark of approval that reminded me of my father. "Thank you, Chairman Morrison. I believe we can start now." The transformation in the room was instantaneous and complete. These were the same men who'd been dismissing me as an intern, an assistant, a student just 30 seconds earlier. Now they sat frozen, their faces cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Jenkins, the senior VP of finance, cleared his throat nervously. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room. "We didn't realize," he started, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the sentence. I walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector with movements that felt more confident than I actually was. The first slide appeared on the wall in bold letters, Q3 Strategic Restructuring Proposal, presented by Alex Morrison, Chief Executive Officer. The title hung there for everyone to see, official and undeniable. CEO, not assistant, not intern, not student, Chief Executive Officer of Morrison Industries. Actually, gentlemen, I said, turning to face the 7 men who'd spent the last 10 minutes treating me like I didn't belong in their world, the real presentation starts now. My voice was calm, measured, professional. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. The authority in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. I clicked to the next slide, a graph showing 3 quarters of declining revenue. The red line seemed to cut through the room like a blade. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge something, I continued, making eye contact with each executive in turn. Some of you may not have realized who I was when I walked in today. That's understandable. I know I don't look like what you expect a CEO to look like. Chen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Richards was staring at the table as if he could disappear into it. But appearance can be deceiving, as I think today's presentation will demonstrate. I never mentioned their comments directly. Not the assistant joke. Not the student whisper. Not the intern suggestion. I didn't need to. The room remembered every word, and my silence about their dismissal somehow made it more powerful than any direct confrontation would have been. The next slide showed department-by-department breakdowns. Operations, sales, human resources, finance, marketing, technology, each one bleeding money, losing market share, failing to meet basic performance metrics. Let's start with operations, I said, clicking to a detailed analysis of Chen's department. Over the past 18 months, operational efficiency has declined by 23%. Manufacturing costs are up 31% compared to industry standards. Quality control failures have increased by 47%. Chen's face went from pale to gray. These weren't numbers he could dispute or explain away. They were facts, pulled from his own department's reports. Mr. Chen, can you walk us through your strategy for addressing these deficiencies? The question hung in the air. Chen opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Well, the market conditions, I interrupted gently, have been favorable for manufacturing companies. Our competitors have seen operational efficiency improvements of 12% on average during the same period. Click. Next slide. Thompson's sales department. Sales performance has been equally concerning. We've lost 17% of our client base over the past 2 quarters. Revenue per client has dropped by 24%. Customer satisfaction scores have fallen to their lowest point in company history. Thompson's face was red now. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. Our competitors are landing the clients we're losing, I continued. The same clients, in the same market, with similar products. The difference isn't market conditions, it's approach. Click. Human resources. Employee turnover has reached 38% annually, nearly double the industry average. Exit interviews consistently cite outdated management practices and lack of growth opportunities. Our recruitment strategy hasn't evolved in over a decade. Patterson looked like he wanted to interrupt, but Morrison's presence at the table kept him silent. Click. Finance. Budget forecasting has been consistently inaccurate, with variances of up to 40% from actual performance. Cost control measures have been implemented reactively rather than strategically. Financial reporting has been delayed in 4 of the past 6 quarters. Harrison's jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Click. Marketing. Marketing ROI has fallen to negative territory in 3 of the past 4 campaigns. Our digital presence ranks below companies 1/10 our size. Brand recognition among our target demographic has dropped 31%. Richards was no longer looking at his phone. He was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his career end in real time. Click. Technology. Our IT infrastructure ranks in the bottom quartile of companies our size. Cybersecurity protocols haven't been updated in 3 years. We're using software systems that our competitors replaced half a decade ago. Foster opened his mouth to object, then seemed to think better of it. These aren't opinions, I said, addressing the room. These aren't subjective assessments or generational differences of perspective. These are quantifiable performance metrics, measured against industry standards and competitive benchmarks. The silence in the room was complete now. No shuffling. Papers, no clearing throats, no nervous coughs. Just 7 men confronting the reality of their failures laid out in undeniable detail. The question before us today isn't whether change is needed, I continued. The question is whether we implement that change proactively or whether we wait for market forces to implement it for us. Click. The next slide showed projected outcomes under current leadership versus projected outcomes under restructured management. Under current trajectory, Morrison Industries will be insolvent within 18 months. Market share will continue declining. Client base will continue shrinking. Stock price will continue falling. The numbers were stark, brutal, undeniable. However, with strategic restructuring, updated management practices, and modern operational approaches, we can return to profitability within 2 quarters and achieve record growth within 12 months. Click. The final slide, restructuring recommendations. This brings us to the decisions that need to be made today. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each executive. Their faces showed everything: fear, anger, resignation, desperation. These were men who'd built their identities around their positions, their authority, their assumed indispensability. They were about to learn how dispensable they really were. The restructuring will be comprehensive, I said. Every department, every position, every process. We'll be evaluating performance, eliminating redundancies, and implementing modern management practices across the organization. Chen finally found his voice. You can't just... We've been with this company for decades. Yes, you have, I agreed. And during those decades, you've overseen the systematic decline of every performance metric that matters. This is insane, Thompson burst out. You can't run a company like this. You can't just waltz in here and... Mr. Thompson! Morrison's voice cut through the outburst like ice. The chairman had been silent throughout my presentation, but now his authority filled the room. The CEO is presenting his strategic analysis. I suggest you listen. Thompson's mouth snapped shut. I continued as if the interruption hadn't happened. The restructuring will begin immediately. Department heads will be evaluated based on performance metrics, strategic vision, and ability to implement modern management practices. And if we don't meet your standards? Harrison asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Then you'll be replaced by someone who can. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For these men, losing their positions wouldn't just mean finding new jobs. It would mean losing their identities, their status, their entire sense of self-worth. You can't do this, Patterson said desperately. The board won't stand for it. The employees won't accept it. The clients won't. The board, Morrison interrupted quietly, has already approved the CEO's authority to implement necessary changes. Another silence. This one felt different, final somehow. The clients, I added, are already leaving because of your performance. The employees are already quitting because of your management. You seem to be confusing cause and effect. Richards leaned forward, his face flushed. You think you can just replace us with a bunch of kids fresh out of college? You think running a company is some kind of game? I think, I replied calmly, that running a company requires competence, adaptability, and results. Age is irrelevant if performance is lacking. This is a mistake, Foster said, shaking his head. A huge mistake. You're going to destroy everything. Your father built. The mention of my father hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. My father built this company on innovation, excellence, and results. Maintaining the status quo while performance declines would be destroying his legacy. I closed my laptop, signaling the end of the presentation. Gentlemen, this concludes... Today's presentation. You'll receive detailed performance evaluations within 48 hours. Those evaluations will determine your continued employment with Morrison Industries. The room erupted in voices, protests, arguments, desperate attempts to negotiate. But Morrison stood up, and his presence commanded immediate silence. "Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Morrison," he said formally. "I believe we have sufficient information to proceed." The chairman looked around the table at the 7 executives who'd been running his company into the ground. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse us, the CEO and I have some additional matters to discuss." It wasn't a request. One by one, they filed out of the boardroom. Chen avoided eye contact entirely. Thompson's face was red with suppressed fury. Patterson looked like he might be sick. Harrison muttered something under his breath that I chose not to hear. Richards paused at the door as if he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Foster shook his head disgustedly as he left. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind them with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. I was alone with Chairman Morrison, the man who'd mentored my father, who'd guided this company for over 4 decades, whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in the industry. Morrison walked to the windows overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he stood there in silence, looking out at the sprawling metropolis below. "That," he said finally, "was quite a presentation. It was necessary." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Your father used to stand right here when he was preparing for difficult decisions. He said it helped him remember what he was fighting for." I joined him at the window, looking out at the thousands of buildings, millions of people, countless businesses struggling and succeeding, and failing in the vast complexity of the modern economy. "He would have been proud of you today," Morrison continued. "Not just of the presentation. Anyone can put together slides and statistics. He would have been proud of how you handled yourself, your composure, your professionalism, your refusal to let their disrespect diminish you. They underestimated me. They underestimated everything about you. Your intelligence, your preparation, your authority, your determination." He paused, studying my face. "The question now is, what do you need from me?" I met his eyes directly. "Full authority to implement the restructuring. No committee approvals, no bureaucratic delays, no second-guessing from the board." Morrison considered this for a long moment. "That's a lot of authority for someone who's been CEO for 6 months. It's the authority necessary to save this company. And if you're wrong, if the restructuring fails, if the new management can't deliver results, then you can fire me and find someone who can." He smiled at that, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him today. "Your father said almost exactly the same thing when he proposed his first major restructuring 20 years ago. Did you give him the authority he needed?" "I did. And he turned this company into an industry leader." Morrison extended his hand. "You have it, Alex. Complete authority to implement the changes you deem necessary." We shook hands, and I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a physical thing. Morrison Industries employed over 50,000 people worldwide. Their livelihoods, their families, their futures, all of it now rested on my decisions. "There is one thing," Morrison added as we walked back toward the conference table. "Those men you just presented to, they're not going to accept this quietly. They have connections, influence, relationships built over decades. They'll fight back. Let them. They'll try to undermine you with the board, with clients, with employees. They'll question your experience, your qualifications, your right to make these decisions. Let them." Morrison paused, studying my face carefully. "They'll make it personal. Alex, they'll attack not just your decisions, but you. Your age, your background, your father's influence in getting you this position. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the comments I'd heard walking into this room today. Assistant, student, intern, daddy's money, the dismissive voices, the casual disrespect, the assumption that I didn't belong in their world. "Chairman Morrison," I said quietly, "they already made it personal. The moment they decided I wasn't worth their respect, he nodded slowly. Then you understand what you're walking into. I understand that this company is dying under their leadership, and I'm the only one willing to do what's necessary to save it. Even if it means destroying careers, ending relationships, making enemies of people who've been with this company longer than you've been alive. Even then, Morrison gathered his papers from the conference table, but before heading to the door he turned back to me one final time. Your father always said that the hardest part of leadership isn't making the tough decisions. It's living with the consequences of those decisions. Are you ready for the consequences, Alex? I looked around the boardroom, at the portraits of former CEOs lining the walls, at the massive table where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made, at the windows overlooking a city full of people counting on companies like ours to provide stability and opportunity. I'm ready. Then God help us all, Morrison said, but he was smiling as he said it. Because you're about to turn this entire company upside down. After he left, I stood alone in the boardroom where, 30 minutes earlier, 7 executives had dismissed me as an assistant. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but expectant, like the moment before a storm. I walked to my father's portrait at the end of the hall, looking up at his confident smile, his steady eyes, his unshakable belief in what this company could become. Well, Dad, I said softly, the real work starts now. Tomorrow I would begin implementing the most comprehensive corporate restructuring in Morrison Industries history. 7 department heads would receive performance evaluations that would end most of their careers. 50,000 employees would learn that their company was changing whether they liked it or not. Competitors would have to adjust their strategies. Clients would have to decide whether they believed in our transformation. But today, in this moment, standing in the hallway where portraits of former CEOs watched over an empire built on innovation and excellence, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father died. I felt ready. The elevator doors opened with the same soft ding that had announced my arrival this morning. But everything else had changed. The young man who'd walked onto this floor 3 hours ago had been hoping to prove he belonged. The CEO who stepped into the elevator now knew he belonged and was prepared to prove that others didn't. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying me away from the boardroom where my authority had been established and my future had been decided, I couldn't help but smile. Let them underestimate me, I thought. Let them whisper about my age, my experience, my right to lead. Next week, they'd learn the cost of underestimating Alex Morrison, and some lessons once learned can never be forgotten. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you prove them wrong? Monday morning arrived like a thunderclap. At exactly 6:47 a.m., every single employee of Morrison Industries, from janitors to senior management, from interns to department heads, received the same email in their inbox. The subject line was simple, direct, and terrifying. Immediate organizational changes. Effective today. I had spent the entire weekend in my office, surviving on coffee and determination. The building was empty except for security guards making their rounds. But my floor blazed with light as I worked through personnel files, performance reviews, financial reports, and organizational charts. By Sunday night, I had a complete picture of exactly what needed to happen. The email I sent was surgical in its precision. Effective immediately, the following organizational changes will take place to ensure Morrison Industries' return to industry, leadership, and sustainable growth. These decisions are final and non-negotiable. Department restructuring will begin today and continue through the week. All affected personnel will be notified directly. Questions should be directed to Human Resources. Alex Morrison, Chief Executive Officer. Attached was a document that would shake the foundation of everything these people thought they knew about job security. 7 departments. 7 different empires built on decades of assumed authority. 7 kingdoms about to fall. I was in my office by 5:30 a.m., watching the sun rise over the city while reviewing my final decisions. The coffee maker had worked overtime all weekend. I'd probably consumed enough caffeine to power a small aircraft, but I needed to be sharp today. What I was about to do would either save Morrison Industries or destroy my career completely. There was no middle ground. At 7:15 a.m., my assistant Jennifer knocked on the door. She looked nervous, which was unusual for someone who'd been handling executive schedules for 15 years. "Sir, Mr. Richards is here to see you. He doesn't look happy." Stephen Richards, head of marketing, 51 years old, and the first executive I decided to terminate. His department had burned through $3 million on a campaign that generated exactly 0 new leads. When I'd asked him about digital marketing strategies, he'd literally laughed and said, "Young people and their computers. Send him in." Richards walked into my office like a man preparing for war. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie slightly crooked, his face flushed with barely contained rage. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit. He planted himself in the chair across from my desk and leaned forward aggressively. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Looked up from the termination letter I'd been reviewing. His termination letter. "Good morning, Stephen. I assume you received the organizational restructuring email." "Organizational restructuring?" He laughed bitterly. "You mean the corporate execution list? You can't just fire half the senior staff because you don't like us." "I'm not firing you because I don't like you," I said calmly. "I'm firing you because your department has failed every performance metric that matters." "Performance metrics?" Richard's voice was rising. "I've been building this company's brand for 12 years. I've won industry awards. You've overseen a 31% decline in brand recognition among our target demographic," I interrupted, opening his file. "Your last 4 campaigns have generated negative ROI. Customer engagement with our marketing materials has dropped to less than 2%. Your digital presence strategy consists of posting the same content we used 5 years ago." Richards's face went from red to purple. "You can't judge 20 years of experience based on a few bad quarters. I can judge 20 years of experience based on 20 years of results. And the results show that your methods stopped working around 2019. I slid the termination letter across the desk. Richards stared at it like it was a live snake. "Effective immediately, your employment with Morrison Industries is terminated. You have until 5 p.m. today to clean out your office. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck and benefits information will be processed by HR." The silence that followed was deafening. Richards picked up the letter with shaking hands, scanning the official company letterhead, the legal language, the signature that would end his career. "You're making a mistake," he whispered. "A huge mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. The board will hear about this. The clients will. The board has already approved these changes. The clients are already leaving because of your performance. You seem to be confusing cause and effect." Richard stood up slowly. The termination letter crumpled in his fist. "You think you can replace me with some kid fresh out of college? You think running a marketing department is some kind of game? I think running a marketing department requires understanding modern consumer behavior, digital platforms, and data-driven decision-making, none of which your department has demonstrated in the past 3 years." He opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to realize there was nothing left to say. The battle was over. He'd lost. "This isn't over," he said as he reached the door. "Yes," I replied quietly. "It is." After Richards left, I buzzed Jennifer. "Please ask Mr. Thompson to come in next." Marcus Thompson, head of sales, 56 years old, and a man who still believed business was conducted on golf courses and in private clubs. His old-school approach had cost us our 2 biggest clients in the past quarter alone, but he'd convinced himself it was due to market conditions. Thompson entered my office with the swagger of a man who'd never been told no in his professional life. Unlike Richards, he sat down casually, crossing his legs and leaning back as if we were old friends. "Having coffee, Alex," he said with forced familiarity. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about this restructuring business." I noticed he'd dropped the Mr. Morrison he'd used in formal meetings. This was Thompson trying to establish peer-to-peer authority, as if my age made us equals despite our positions. "I agree," I said. "That's why you're here." "Look, I understand you want to make your mark, establish your authority, all that. I was young once, too. But you can't just tear down everything we've built because you want to prove something." "I'm not tearing down what you've built, Marcus. I'm cleaning up what you've destroyed." His casual demeanor flickered for just a moment. "What I've destroyed? I've been bringing in clients since before you could drive. And losing them since before I graduated college." I opened his file. Revenue per client down 24%. Client retention at 62%. Industry average is 87%. Customer satisfaction scores consistently in the bottom quartile. Those numbers don't tell the whole story. They tell the only story that matters: results. Thompson's mask of casual confidence was slipping. You can't judge sales performance based on spreadsheets and statistics. Sales is about relationships, trust, personal connections, all of which you've failed to maintain. Our competitors are landing the clients you're losing, Marcus. The same clients in the same market selling similar products. The difference isn't market conditions, it's competence. I slid his termination letter across the desk. Thompson stared at it without touching it, as if refusing to acknowledge its existence could make it disappear. "This is insane," he said finally. "You can't run a sales department without experience. These relationships take decades to build, and you've spent the past 2 years destroying them." I leaned forward. "Marcus, your approach worked in 1995. It's 2025. The business world has evolved. You haven't. So you're going to replace me with some millennial who thinks everything can be done over Zoom calls? I'm going to replace you with someone who understands that modern sales involves data analytics, customer relationship management systems, and value propositions that go beyond golf handicaps and country club memberships." Thompson finally picked up the termination letter, his hands trembling slightly. "The clients won't accept this. They know me, trust me. The clients who are still here will be contacted by our new sales leadership. The clients who left because of your performance are already gone." He stood up slowly, the letter hanging from his fingers like a death certificate. "You're going to regret this, kid. My name is Mr. Morrison, and the only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." After Thompson left, I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to feel the weight of what I was doing. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people with families, mortgages, children in college. But sentimentality wouldn't save the 50,000 other employees whose jobs depended on this company's survival. Jennifer knocked again. "Sir, Mr. Patterson is here, and he brought someone with him. James Patterson, Director of Human Resources, accompanied by what looked like a lawyer in an expensive suit. This was going to be interesting." Patterson entered with his legal counsel, both men wearing the grim expressions of people preparing for battle. The lawyer introduced himself as Jonathan Whitfield from Whitfield, Barnes & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious employment law firms. "Mr. Morrison," Whitfield began before even sitting down, "my client has some serious concerns about the legality of these terminations." I gestured for them to sit. "I'm listening." "These terminations appear to be based on age discrimination," Whitfield continued, opening his briefcase. "Firing multiple employees over 50 while retaining younger staff creates a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior." Patterson leaned forward. "Alex, I've been with this company for 18 years. My performance reviews have been excellent. There's no legitimate basis for termination." I opened Patterson's file, the thickest one on my desk. "James, in the past 3 years, employee turnover in your department has reached 38% annually. Exit interviews consistently cite outdated management practices and lack of advancement opportunities. Our recruitment strategy hasn't evolved since 2010. Those are subjective assessments. They're quantifiable metrics with direct financial impact. High turnover costs this company approximately $2.3 million annually in recruitment, training, and lost productivity, Whitfield interrupted. Regardless of performance metrics, targeting employees over 50 for termination while promoting younger staff creates legal liability. I'm not targeting anyone based on age, I said calmly. I'm evaluating performance based on results. Age is completely irrelevant. Then explain why every terminated employee happens to be over 50. I had been expecting this argument. Because every department head happens to be over 50. If younger employees had been promoted to leadership positions over the past decade, the age demographics would be different. But your client's hiring and promotion practices have maintained an artificially aged leadership structure. Patterson's face flushed. That's not... We hire based on qualifications. You hire based on comfort level and cultural fit, which has resulted in a workforce that looks remarkably similar to the leadership team. I pulled out demographic reports. 87% of management positions are held by white males over 45. Your diversity metrics are so poor they'd be embarrassing at a 1950s country club. Whitfield was taking notes frantically. My clients' hiring practices aren't on trial here. Actually, they are, because those practices have created legal liability, reduced innovation, and contributed to the performance failures that necessitated these terminations. I slid Patterson's termination letter across the desk. James, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks' severance, more than required by law or contract. Patterson stared at the letter in shock. You can't do this. I know where all the bodies are buried in this company. I know about the sexual harassment, complaints that were settled quietly, the discrimination lawsuits that were paid off, James, I interrupted quietly, threatening to expose the company's legal problems, isn't helping your case. It's actually demonstrating exactly why you need to be terminated. Whitfield put a restraining hand on Patterson's arm. We'll be filing wrongful termination suits against both you personally and Morrison Industries as a corporation. You're right. Our legal department will respond appropriately. After they left, I sat alone for a moment, processing what had just happened. Patterson's threats weren't empty. He probably did know about buried legal issues, but keeping him employed because he had damaging information would be letting fear dictate business decisions. My father had always said, make decisions based on what's right, not what's easy. Jennifer knocked again. Sir, the remaining executives are all here. They're together. In Conference Room B, Robert Chen, Richard Harrison, and Michael Foster, operations, finance, and technology respectively. They decided to make their final stand as a united front. I walked to Conference Room B with my files, my termination letters, and the absolute certainty that what I was doing was necessary. The 3 men sat around the smaller conference table, like generals planning a last desperate battle. Chen stood up as I entered. Alex, we need to talk. I sat down across from them, placing 3 folders on the table. Each man's name was visible on the tabs. This is insane, Harrison said without preamble. You can't just fire the entire senior leadership team. I'm not firing the entire senior leadership team, I replied. I'm replacing incompetent department heads with qualified professionals. Foster leaned forward. Incompetent? We've been running this company since before you could walk, and running it into the ground for the past 3 years. Chen's voice was tight with controlled anger. We built this company. We made it profitable. We created jobs for thousands of people. You inherited a profitable company and systematically destroyed its competitive advantages through resistance to change and adherence to obsolete practices. I opened Chen's file first. Robert, operational, efficiency down 23%. Manufacturing costs up 31% above industry standards. Quality control failures up 47%. Your department alone has cost this company over $8 million in preventable losses. Chen's face went pale. Market conditions. Our competitors have improved operational efficiency by 12% during the same period. Market conditions don't explain a 35% performance gap. I turned to Harrison. Richard, budget forecasting accuracy at 62%. Industry standard is 85%. Cost overruns in 4 of the past 6 quarters. Financial reporting delays that have cost us 2 major client contracts. Harrison's jaw was clenched. You can't judge financial management based on, I can judge financial management based on financial results, and the results show systematic failure. Finally, Foster. Michael, IT infrastructure ranked in the bottom quartile of companies our size. Cybersecurity protocols 3 years out of date. Software systems that competitors replaced half a decade. Ego. Your resistance to modernization has made us vulnerable to data breaches and competitive disadvantage. Foster exploded. You want to replace experience with untested kids who think technology solves everything. I want to replace failure with competence, regardless of age. I slid the 3 termination letters across the table simultaneously. The sound of paper on wood seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Gentlemen, your employment with Morrison Industries is terminated effective immediately. The room erupted in voices, protests, arguments, threats, desperate attempts to negotiate, but I remained seated, calm, waiting for the storm to pass. You're destroying this company? Chen shouted. I'm saving it. The board will remove you, Harrison threatened. The board has already approved these changes. You'll never find replacements, Foster yelled. No one will work for you after this. I've already found replacements. They start tomorrow. That stopped them cold. What? Chen whispered. Did you think I was firing you without having succession plans in place? I've spent the past 6 months identifying, interviewing, and hiring your replacements. They're younger, more qualified, and significantly more competent than any of you have been in years. The 3 men stared at me in shock. They'd assumed I was acting impulsively, emotionally, without planning. They'd never considered that I might be 10 steps ahead of them. This is impossible, Harrison said weakly. You can't replace this much experience overnight. Experience doing what? Failing? Because that's the only thing you've been experienced at lately. I stood up, gathering my files. Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be packed and sent to your homes. Your final paychecks will be processed by HR. As I reached the door, Foster called out desperately, Your father would be ashamed of you. I turned back to face him. My father built this company on innovation, excellence, and results. Maintaining your failures would be the real shame. I left, them sitting around the conference table holding their termination letters, finally understanding that their reign was over. Back in my office, I buzzed Jennifer. Please ask the new department heads to come in. All of them. At 2 p.m., 5 people entered my office, the future leadership of Morrison Industries. Sarah Chen, 32, new head of operations, MBA, from Wharton, previously VP of operations at our biggest competitor. David Martinez, 29, new head of sales, who'd increased revenue by 47% at his previous company using data-driven strategies. Jessica Thompson, 35, new director of human resources, expert in diversity and inclusion with a track record of reducing turnover. Michael Park, 27, new CFO, CPA with advanced degrees in financial analytics. And Emma Rodriguez, 31, new director of technology, who'd led digital transformations at 3 Fortune 500 companies. Welcome to Morrison Industries, I said as they sat down around my desk. You're probably wondering why I asked you all to start today, instead of next week? Sarah smiled. We heard there were some changes in leadership. 7 department heads were terminated this morning. Their replacements, you, start immediately. Questions? David leaned forward. What kind of resistance should we expect from existing staff? Significant resistance initially, which will diminish rapidly when they see results improve. Anyone who can't adapt to new leadership will be replaced. Jessica asked, "What authority do we have to make changes within our departments?" Complete. Authority. Hire, fire, restructure, implement new systems. Whatever you need to achieve the performance targets we discussed during your interviews. Michael looked concerned. What about budget constraints? There are no budget constraints for necessary improvements. Spend what you need to fix what's broken. Emma was taking notes. Timeline for implementation? Immediate. Every day delay is money lost and competitive advantage surrendered. I stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. Ladies and gentlemen, this company was dying under previous leadership. Your job is to bring it back to life. You have my complete support, unlimited resources, and total authority within your departments. I turned back to face them. But understand this. I didn't fire 7 department heads to replace them with 5 new failures. Results are expected, improvements are mandatory, and excuses won't be tolerated. Questions? There were none. Then welcome to Morrison Industries. Let's get to work. As they filed out to take control of their new departments, Jennifer knocked on my door again. "Sir, Chairman Morrison is here to see you." Morrison entered my office with the expression of a man who'd been fielding phone calls all day. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher I kept on the side table. "Alex," he said quietly, "I've been getting some very interesting phone calls today. I imagine you have? 7 terminated executives, 3 law firms threatening wrongful termination suits, 2 board members demanding emergency meetings, and 1 very angry conversation with our biggest client who heard rumors about management instability. I had expected this. What did you tell the client?" "I told them that Morrison Industries was implementing strategic improvements to better serve their needs." "And the board members?" "I told them that the CEO has full authority to make personnel decisions and that second-guessing those decisions would undermine company leadership." "And the law firms?" Morrison smiled grimly. "I told them to get in line behind the other lawyers who've threatened to sue us over the years." He leaned forward, studying my face carefully. "But Alex, there's something else. Something more serious." My stomach clenched. "What?" "Kid, the FBI contacted me this afternoon." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "The FBI?" "They're investigating irregularities in our Pentagon contract from last year. Potential fraud, bid rigging, possibly bribery." My mouth went dry. "Do we know what kind of irregularities?" "Not yet. But Alex—" Morrison's voice was grave. "The contract was negotiated by Richards's marketing team and approved by Thompson's sales division, the 2 executives I'd fired that morning. They think we terminated Richards and Thompson because we knew about the investigation." "Did we?" "No. But try explaining that to federal prosecutors who are looking for corporate conspiracies." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. This changes everything. It could. If the FBI finds evidence of criminal activity, they'll assume executive leadership was involved. You're the CEO. You're responsible for everything that happens under your watch, whether you knew about it or not. What do you recommend? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Complete cooperation, full transparency. And pray that Richards and Thompson were just incompetent rather than criminal. That evening, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over the city. The building was mostly empty now, but lights were on in several departments where the new leadership teams were working late, implementing changes, establishing their authority. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. "Operations team working until midnight to fix the quality control issues. We'll have a preliminary report by morning." Another text from David Martinez. "Met with sales team. Morale is low, but they're willing to try new approaches. 3 client meetings scheduled for tomorrow." Jessica Thompson. HR processing 67 resignation letters from employees who don't want to work under new management. Probably for the best. Michael Park. Financial audit reveals significant budget irregularities in marketing and sales. We'll need to discuss tomorrow. Emma Rodriguez. IT security assessment complete. Multiple vulnerabilities found. Emergency patches being implemented tonight. 5 new department heads, working through their first night on the job, fixing problems that had been ignored for years. This was what competent leadership looked like. But as I sat there reading their updates, I couldn't shake Morrison's warning about the FBI investigation. If Richards and Thompson had been involved in criminal activity, their terminations would look like evidence of a cover-up. Federal prosecutors would assume I'd known about their crimes and fired them to avoid corporate liability. The irony was, bitter, I'd fired them for incompetence, but if they were actually criminals, that competence-based decision would be seen as evidence of conspiracy. My phone rang. Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Alex, we need to meet early tomorrow. The FBI wants to interview you. When? 9 a.m. Federal Building downtown. Bring our corporate attorney. After he hung up, I sat in the darkness of my office, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Richards and Thompson were probably calling lawyers, plotting revenge, preparing to destroy everything I'd built. Somewhere else, federal agents were building a case that could send me to prison for crimes I'd never committed. And throughout the building below me, 50,000 employees were going about their lives, unaware that their CEO might be arrested before the week was over. I thought about my father's portrait in the hallway, about his belief in doing what was right regardless of the consequences. He'd built this company on integrity, innovation, and results. If I went to prison for cleaning up the mess left by criminals, at least I'd go knowing I'd tried to save what he'd created. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave the office, I couldn't help wondering, had I saved Morrison Industries or had I destroyed everything in a single day? Tomorrow I would find out. The elevator doors closed with their familiar soft ding, carrying me down from the executive floor where, 12 hours earlier, I'd been fighting for my company's survival. Now I was fighting for my own. Some battles I was learning never really end. They just get more expensive. If this chapter had you on the edge of your seat, comment below. What would you have done in Alex's position? Would you have fired everyone? Or tried to work with them? Subscribe. Because Chapter 3 is going to reveal whether Alex's gamble pays off or destroys everything he's trying to save. And share this story.